this video, we're going to take a look at creating facilities or ground units inside of Command PE database. So basically the difference here is that a facility, if you want to think about it as a building or a group of units, and a ground unit represents an individual unit. If I had, for example, a single M1 Abrams, I'd probably create that as a ground unit. If I had a patrol or some kind of platoon, or maybe I want to have a company of Abrams, I probably put that under facilities. Facilities also includes structures such as buildings, SAM sites, and things like that. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that in a moment. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on facilities. Now the exact same process that we used previously is going to be the same here. Basically what you're going to do is make a copy of an existing facility that is closest to what you're working in. You're going to go ahead and populate all the critical form fields, run a validation just to quickly make sure that everything works okay. Take a look at the validation report. If there's any errors that need to be fixed, that will be the time to go ahead and add all the individual components in that facilities unit. Fortunately, facilities are some of the easiest to work with, but there are a couple little traps, especially when dealing with magazines as well as mounts that you're going to have to worry about as well. We'll take a look at that as we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a pretty straightforward unit. Now we're going to make ourselves basically a little armored bunker. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our database datasheet view. And we're going to see if there's anything we can use here for the purposes of making a little bunker here. So I'm going to go ahead and go unit long title. I'm going to go ahead and do my sort button. Like I said, you're going to want to have that filter button up there. Make sure I have it very simple. We'll go ahead and sort by bunker, and let's see what we have to work with here. We have an underground command bunker. We have a comms jam. Okay, we have an ammo bunker, which is too bad of an idea. We have a communication center. I think that's going to be a little bit too big for us. We have a diesel bunker, which I don't think is going to work too much. Launch control facility is probably going to be on the bigger side here. I'm going to go for the OEMC station. I think that's going to be a pretty solid little place to work from. So that's a unit 3134. So I'm going to go ahead and unfilter everything. We don't need to see it anymore. We'll go down to 3134. And that is right here. And we're going to go ahead and make a quick add-in. We'll go to Command, Copy Entry. So now we have a brand new entry at the top. And now I'm going to come up to here and press Form View. So now we're going to go ahead and work our way through the different components here. So first of all, this is bunker, and we'll call this basically a hard point or something like that, strong point. All right, country, we'll make it generic. Anybody can operate it. A year, we're not going to put a year in. We don't need to worry about it. Example, bunker with some armaments. Keep it pretty simple. This is hypothetical if we wanted to make it. And now we can go ahead and define things like your length, your width, as well as your different area. So in this case, I don't think it's going to be quite that large. I think it's going to be a little bit smaller. So let's go for about 15 meters by 15 meters, which gives it a vastly smaller area. Damage points, it's going to be a pretty strong bunker, so I'll say 10. Dispersal radius simply says if I have more than one unit in a particular group, that we can go ahead and spread those units out among multiple positions. In this case, since there's only one object, we don't have to worry about this. Mounts are aim points. This is a critical checkbox if you're working with small groups. We'll take a look at a small group, such as a group of tanks, and that simply says that these mounts that we have down here represent the individual components of the entire facility, versus if you disable this particular box, this entire bit is one object and it is one facility. Over here, we have the ability to define the crew. In this case, I'm not worried about how many people are inside. We have the missile defense value. It's going to be a solid object. I'm not worried about that too much. We can define the UDA detection cycle, the targeting cycle, and the evasive cycle. In this case, it takes a little bit longer than that to go ahead and acquire a target and then actually engage it. Over here, we can set the general armor. Keep in mind, this is just general. It's definitely going to be a strong point, so I expect it to have heavy armor. Next thing we can do is we can go ahead and set what category it is. In this case, to me, this is a bunker building, and that simply means that it's going to be up on the top, and this also kind of changes the graphics inside the program. Over here, we have the ability to define the signature type. Notice right now they're all set to negative values because this is assuming we're an underground facility. So in this case, we'll see here, most buildings, sounds like a pretty logical feature. Let's see here, IR mod, it's going to be relatively medium. In our radar mod, again, there's nothing special about it at all, so we're going to set that to medium, and it's going to automatically populate all of our different values instantaneously, so we don't have to stress out about it too much. Note for this particular type of unit, we're not going to be interested in fuel because this is going to be a simple bunker that's going to be sitting down there on the ground. But if we need to, we could come in here and dial these individual items in. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our next step. After you do all these pieces, generally what you're going to want to do is you're going to go ahead and run the validation to make sure you have no errors so far. So go ahead and do that process and see what pops up. All right, there we go. Let's see if any errors came up on our particular database here. So go back up to the database, Go down to validation, and we're looking for any facility that seems to be having some kind of issue. We'll go ahead and sort this out real quick. We'll deselect everybody and just select facilities because that's going to be the ones with our problems. So let's see, we don't have some legal arcs, but none of these are our particular facility that we just created just a few moments ago. Taking a look. We have an UDA cycle. Oh, we got busted. We have a targeting cycle, but we don't have any weapons, but that's all right. So I'm going to go ahead and close that real quickly. We don't need to save, no changes to that. We'll go ahead and back over to our facilities. And now we're going to go ahead and take a look at what we're going to do next. So right now we're going to take a look at our sensors. So right now we have some ESM. On either one of these, it makes a lot of sense here. So instead what we'll do is we'll add something a little bit more traditional. We'll give everybody basically, some binoculars. I think that feels pretty good. So we'll call it generic. Now let's see here, generic, let's see, anti-air looks good to me. A couple pair of binoculars. I don't think we have any special radar or anything like that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete both of these because I'm not going to need either one of them. And there we go. So now we have a set of generic binoculars. We can go define the arc of search. In this case, we're going to be able to see all the way around us. Now, if we wanted to, we could come in here and attach some kind of laser designator or something. But like I said, we're going to keep this to be a basic, simple bunker. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is adding any sort of aircraft facilities. So we do not need any aircraft or facilities on this one. We're not going to have any sort of special parking. We're not going to have any special, hangars, no special equipment because we're just dealing with a bunker. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and stick a helipad on the top, but I don't think that's going to be necessary. Next, we're going to add any docking facilities. In this case, we're not a ship, so I'm not going to worry about this too much. But if we were some kind of pier, we could come in here and define things like dry dock shelters and everything along those lines, should we need to do so. Afterwards, we're going to add mounts. Now, mounts are going to get a little complicated. Basically, what a mount is going to be one collection of guns. For example, if you're at a ship and you had three 76mm guns coming out of the same turret, that whole mount, that whole turret would be a single one of those units. So in this case, we have a bunch of different varieties as far as what we can select from. We can pick some 100mm guns here. In this case, I'm actually just going to keep it nice and simple and grab myself probably a nice 125mm if I can find it easily. 125mm, that's going to take a minute. We'll go ahead and see what we have for 105. Here we go. There's some really, really solid coastal guns here. So we have everything from a casemate through an open gun well through a turret. In our particular case, we're probably going to be a casemate. So now that I've gone ahead and selected that, if I want to inspect it, I can always just double click right here, which is going to bring us to it. Now there's going to be a bunch of values that we're going to be very, very interested in. Now the first one we're going to be is the armor of that particular unit. So our gun itself has medium armor. So in the event that that is struck, the damage control has to go through this armor in order to affect it. Afterwards, we have our rate of fire. In that case, 6 simply means you're going to get one shot every 6 seconds. It has the capacity of that particular gun. In this case, we have 250 rounds. It has the magazine rate of fire. Now this is interesting because in this particular case, we're not going to be pulling more shells out. The amount of shells we have at our disposal is how many shells that we're going to be able to have here. And again, our magazine capacity is also going to be 0. Availability, a total amount of damage it can take. And then, of course, it has other features such as, is it fully autonomous? Can it be controlled locally, which simply means we don't have to direct it with a different tool? Is it a reserve target? Is it a hot reload, which simply speeds up the reloading process? Is it a mount that can be pointed in specific directions? Now, it's worth noting, if you look down here in the bottom center, I only have the ability to point in these particular arcs with this particular gun here. If I wanted to modify this later on, I would have to actually set this up in such a way that I can do it in all the different directions. So this is something we're going to have to think about when we actually set up our little bunker here. So we're going to go over to our bunker real quick, select it, and we're going to make sure that everything is set up in that correct way. So now we'll go back to our arcs, and we'll define the arcs exactly the same as we saw on that particular mount. If you don't do this, they will not be able to engage in a way that will actually be effective. So now that we have our marks, we have our weapons, we have everything we need, we're not going to worry about cargo or anything like that. We can, of course, all go over to this and actually inspect the individual weapons. In this case, I can see that we have one 105mm gun here, but if I wanted to, I could actually double click on it, take a look at the weapon itself, which is going to have its default load, and notice that these numbers are internally consistent with what comes with the mount itself. It is possible to have different weapons that go onto different mounts, or it's possible to take the same weapon on different mounts as well, just with different types of properties, but we'll take a look at that a little later on. Afterwards, we can take a look at the weapon itself if we choose to do so, and have a pretty good idea of everything that's going to be going on with it. So in this case, I'm happy. The weapon gets mounted into a weapon record, which gets put onto a mount, which now gets put onto our facility. Remember, this is a locally controlled particular piece. Next item we're going to take a look at is going to be adding communications. And this is done the exact same way that we can do it with aircraft. Simply go down to communications and define it. So for example, if we have no landline, we can now do, let's say, UHF radio. We'll say that it's a secure UHF radio. We'll also go ahead and say it's HF radio as well. And we'll also assume that it is also secure. And now we have everything that we need for this particular piece. Now, the last piece, and this is where it's going to get a little complicated, is going to be adding magazines. Now, as you recall, we added ourselves a 105 millimeter coastal gun here, which carries 250 rounds and it has no reloads on board. If we wanted the ability to be able to reload this gun, we'd have to add a custom magazine on here. In which case, if I type in 105 millimeter rather, I notice there has been no magazines created specifically for this particular one. If we wanted to, we could actually come into here. We'll press OK. That's all right. Clean this out before it gets grumpy at us. Double click on it. Set to 0. Yes, so we're not going to put any special magazines on this particular one, but we would have the ability to go back and create one as well. So now that we have all these different pieces all set up, we have our unit. And the last thing we have to do, of course, is quickly go ahead and take a look at our validation report to see if everything is okay. So when you're creating facilities, this is pretty much the quickest way to create a single unit. But not every facility is going to be one big unit. Several facilities can be spread out units. Let's take a look at a few examples of those so you have an idea of what that's going to look like. So I'll go ahead and go back to my data sheet real quickly. We'll go ahead and take a look at an example of a sand battery, for example. We'll go ahead and pop this one open. And now you'll notice there's a couple different items. For one, you'll notice that mounts are aim points. And each one of these mounts represents a different vehicle within this particular sand battery. Keep in mind that the arcs of this particular sand battery may be different. Also note that there are no sensors because each one of these individual mounts may be equipped with its own sensors. For example, I take a look at this one. It is an electro-optical sight. I'll double click on it. And I can see that this particular mount, which you can imagine that little kind of trainable item on the side, is made up of multiple sensors that can now be attacked separate from everything else that you have on the actual unit itself. Keep in mind you also have the ability to create mount directors, but we're going to take a look at that when we start looking at ships later on. Now, facilities are basically, like I said, single units or something that's pretty much going to stay in the same place. Ground units are a relatively new entry, which are going to be very, very similar to facilities. So when we initially open up ground units, you're going to see that pretty much every detail we saw before is going to be present. The only difference in this particular case is you're not going to have the ability to target this thing separately. It's considered one complete unit. Also note that you have land speed as well as range, as well as water speed and water range on the side here. This simply dictates how much fuel this particular unit should carry given what you're going to be doing. In this case, we have an AAVP 7A1. If we were to change the speed, it would have an impact on the amount of fuel that it would carry, assuming that the range for cruise did not change at all. Also notice you have a separate place for engine. If we take a look at the ground unit's engine, notice this is going to be the same style that we saw before. The only different piece here is that all the work for the engine is going to be pre-calculated for us depending on what we're doing as far as defining our land range and speed up at the top. Also notice, just like before, everything that we can take a look at as far as arcs are all going to be completely dictated by the control here. And also notice we're going to have to now create a separate fuel component here in order to actually represent the diesel fuel that this particular vessel carries. Keep in mind that these values have to be internally consistent in order for the entire unit to work. And again, your ground unit is going to be the exact same. The only difference, like I said, are going to be those little changes here. So if we go ahead and take a look at a different type of ground unit, we'll go ahead and skip ahead just a little bit, and we'll take a look at a rifleman. Notice our rifleman here has no particular speed or anything along those lines, simply because this particular unit doesn't need fuel because it would represent a single soldier here. And you can see everything else has been eliminated, giving them the generic performance of whatever particular icon or particular unit that they've established for this particular one. Also note that if we take something such as a radar system, such as the SA-6 here, notice it does not have the radar capability on board. It only has basically the SA-6 itself. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and add those other components to it, we would have to actually create that separate radar, and we would have to actually group them together inside of the editor in order to make it so that we can actually do those ground units together. Keep in mind, after we've done all the work on all of our ground units and facilities, we should always run validation and make sure we convert it directly into the correct database.